Dear ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, good evening, and good morning to all of you. I'm Dominik Plattner, the ITTF High Performance Manager, and I'm very delighted and would like to warmly welcome all of you to our 47 ITTF HPD webinar with the topic Travel Strategies for Table Tennis Players, and especially nowadays in a time in which the tournament schedule is well filled and players have to travel a lot around the world, independent from their level. And usually all this beside their obligation with their clubs. So yeah, very important and I would say common topic nowadays. Very present. But before going over to the introduction of our guest, I want to talk shortly and briefly about our webinar code of the Q&A. To all the attendees, please leave your questions in the Q&A section. Our guest will try to answer as many as possible in the question and answer part of the webinar. Thank you very much for taking care of this. And now it's time for the introduction of our guest for today. And it's a great pleasure and honor for us to warmly welcome a great sports science expert, our well-known Dr. Samuel Pullinger from the UK. He's a PhD in sports and exercise physiology. He did it at the Liverpool John Muir's University in the UK. He is an exercise physiologist and research committee member, and he was it at the Liverpool John Muir's University from 2010 till 2014, and currently he is it at the Aspire Academy in Doha in Qatar. He's a lecturer in exercise physiology at the University of Split at the current state, and he was in Liverpool at the John Muir's University from 2012 till 2015. He's a postgraduate student supervisor, a basis SE supervisor and reviewer, and a lot of information about him can be found at ResearchGate, Google Scholar, and LinkedIn. And now I would like to thank you very much, Samuel, for taking the time to be here today, and it's nice to meet you again. And also a warm welcome to our experienced ITTF High Performance Elite Coach, Massimo Constantini. So pass over to you, Max, and I kindly ask you for your welcoming words.
Thank you, Dominic. Thanks again, Samuel, for being with us. You start to be familiar to our table tennis family and delivering great lectures. And today we have another example about the knowledge of Samuel Pullinger. Well, traveling around the world, yes, is for table tennis players, but also for the coaches, it's not that different, because when you reach the destination, you have to be lucid, you have to be focused, fresh, and also all these good facts in the presentation, amazing presentation, will be very, very helpful for the table tennis community used to travel around the world. So I stop here again. Thank you, Samuel. Thank you, Dominica. Thanks all the attendees, and good luck for the presentation. And I hope you guys there, you like it. Thank you very much. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction. Let me just share my screen with you guys. Here we go. So as you're all aware, today I'll be discussing or talking about travel strategies for table tennis players. But again, this can be used also for coaches, for practitioners, or for anyone who's involved within sport, or even traveling for social aspects. So a little bit about the outline of the talk and the discussion that I want to have today. So I want to cover some aspects related to long-haul flights. So what is this travel fatigue versus jet lag that we hear a lot about? What are the differences in symptoms? So are these different? I then want you to understand a little bit regarding the body clock and the importance of the body clock when it comes to long-haul flights, and what effect or influence this has on different aspects related to performance, related to mood states, related to sleep, etc. Then I will cover a little bit regarding the effect on travel on performance. And then I want to discuss a little bit more regarding these time zone transitions, because I'm very aware that especially in table tennis, we're traveling a lot to different sides of the world for different tournaments, and this travel is highly affecting our well-being and our performance. So again, here we will cover a little bit of the differences between flying east versus west. I will provide you some strategies to alleviate this jet lag, also discuss management of jet lag, and then provide you a little bit of advice for travel moving forward. So what I want you to learn from this talk or this lecture is to have an understanding of the difference between travel fatigue and jet lag, appreciate the effect of travel on performance, sleep, and nutrition, to be able to create a better coping strategy for yourself when it comes, or for your athlete when it comes to traveling for camps or competitions. And then finally, to also understand the negative effects of travel if we are not prepared with the basics when traveling. So a small little introduction. So we know that a lot of table tennis athletes, coaches, practitioners are now undertaking long distance flights. And this has increased over the last few years because tournaments are taking place in different parts of the world, because we want to open up the sport and promote the sport in different parts of the world. But what we also know is that traveling is closely associated with this travel fatigue and or jet lag. And I've put and or because jet lag is not always present depending on where we're traveling, how long we're traveling for, etc. Again, the length of the flight, the number of time zone transitions will determine the severity of this travel fatigue and jet lag. So if we have a little look at the Tokyo 2020, or we can say 2021 Olympics, which will take place, and we just randomly take 4 different parts of the world. So if we have a look at Beijing, we know that it's a 3-hour flight. If we're going from Paris or Denver in the USA, again, it's a 12-hour flight. And if we travel from Sao Paulo in Brazil, it's a 25-hour flight because we need 1 stopover. Okay, this is very interesting. So we have different lengths in flights. But what is the difference when it comes to hours and time zones? So we know that Beijing, China has 1 hour difference, so this is very minimal. Paris, France has 7 hours difference. Denver has 15 hours. And Sao Paulo, Brazil has 12 hours. So what's interesting and important here is that although Paris and Denver take exactly the same amount of time to travel to Tokyo, there's double the amount of time difference between Paris and Denver when it comes to Tokyo and local time. And again, Sao Paulo takes nearly double the time to travel to Tokyo compared to Denver. But again, there's slightly less time difference. And this is important. And I will highlight and explain to you why it is important a little bit later on. But first, let's understand this travel fatigue or jet lag. So what are some of the issues? Well, we have no control over light conditions. So when we're in the plane, the lights come on and the lights are switched off whenever they choose to switch them on or off. So we have no real control when it comes to light conditions. We know that the in-flight noise level is 185 to 105 decibels on average. We know that we often have very cramped seating conditions, so there's not a lot of space to move. We have no control over meal times, so we eat whenever we get told to eat, and we get given the food at random times. Again, there's this stress associated with travel and the organization of travel. Have I packed my passport? Have I got all my documents? Am I arriving on time at the airport? Have I prepared everything that I need to prepare? So again, there's a lot of stress when it comes to travel and travel organization. And again, these long haul flights, there's an increased risk of this urinary tract infection. So sore stomachs, breathing issues, many different problems that come with it. And then again, within the flight, there's 15 to 20% relative humidity. So they've completely brought down the humidity in the airplane, which is nearly half of what it is during a daily average normal day. So again, these are all issues that come with travel fatigue and jet lag. But if we have a little look at travel fatigue, so we know that travel fatigue and travel, more importantly, is associated with negative feelings upon arrival. What are some of the symptoms? So general fatigue is a symptom which is closely related to traveling. Disorientation, increased likelihood of headaches, again, closely associated when we travel, usually due to dehydration as well. This travel weariness, being tired because we've sat in cramped conditions, because we've got no space to move, etc. And then some of the causes are the difficulties associated with travel obviously causes fatigue, and there's dehydration caused by this dry air and this limited food and drink intake. But these are two of the main causes when it comes to travel fatigue. And the final one is this disruption to our sleep and our routines. If we have a little bit of a look at jet lag, so how does jet lag differ from travel fatigue? So jet lag is also fatigue, but now we're talking about this extreme tiredness and other physical effects which are felt by individuals, but after we've gone through a long flight across different time zones. So if we're traveling from the UK to Japan, or we're going from China to the USA, and we've gone through lots of different time zones, this is when we go through this extreme tiredness and what we can call jet lag. So what are some of the symptoms of jet lag? This is poor sleep during the nighttime, poorer performance related to physical and mental tasks. So when we wake up the next day or when we perform exercise, we're actually far worse than what we are if we were at home. Also, these negative subjective changes, so lack of appetite, being a little bit moody, being a little bit grumpy, having a very short fuse when it comes to your mental state, etc. Gastrointestinal disturbances, so all this is also related to some of the food that we may be eating or that we've had on board, or the food that we have when we arrive in the new destination. And what are some of the causes of this? This is really due to this slow adjustment of the body clock to the new time zone, which basically means that all your rhythms within your body and your internal drive for sleep and being awake are not synced with the new environment. So if there is an 8-hour difference between Paris and Tokyo, even though we're in Tokyo at midnight, the reality is our body is thinking that it's 4 o'clock in London. But this is why we have these issues. If we compare travel fatigue versus jet lag, what are the differences? So we know that travel fatigue is associated with any long journey. Jet lag, however, is also associated with this long journey, but needs 3 or more time zones to be crossed rapidly in order to feel the effect. Travel fatigue usually abates or disappears the following day after a good night's sleep. However, what we do know is that jet lag flying eastwards will last for several days. So for every hour that we go east, 2/3 of the number of time zones crossed, it will take to recover and get back to a normal feeling or normal state. So basically that your body clock is synchronized. If we fly westward, so let's say we fly 8 hours west, it will take half the number of time zones crossed to recover. So this means approximately 4 days. So we know traveling east is worse than traveling west. And again, this is something that I will discuss with you later on when we create a small plan related to jet lag and travel fatigue when traveling. But before we go on to discussing a plan to fight the jet lag symptoms. I want to discuss a little bit about the body clock and what this is. So if we have a little look at the image on the right, and this is a normal day, we tend to feel sleepy around 9, 10 o'clock in the evening and more awake around 7 o'clock in the morning. And then we have these periods of hunger and thirst at specific times during the day and increased levels of focus and activity at specific times of the day. But to understand and cope with jet lag, we also need to be aware of the basic properties of the body clock. So in simple terms, what is it? So we know that the body clock is our biological clock, which tends to run for about 24 plus hours and has cycles, or what we call circadian rhythms, which are affected by light and darkness. So this is why we work over a 24-hour period, because outside it's light and then it's dark, which basically means that our brain is telling our body that it's either time to sleep or that it's time to wake up. So our body clock, which works over 24-hour cycles, functions aspects such as sleeping and waking, but also controls other things such as your body temperature, such as levels of different hormones, etc. And our body clock is also promoting this activity during the daytime, but recovery, restitution during the night, especially when we're asleep. So now if we go through these time zone transitions, so what is actually happening with this body clock? So it's affecting our internal, or what we call this endogenous component, which is our body clock, but it's also affecting our external or our exogenous component, which is this environment, this lifestyle, this doing exercise, etc. Usually these two are very well synchronized, but when we travel, this completely desynchronizes these endogenous, exogenous, or internal and external components, which basically means, or where jet lag comes from. So what happens is this external or exogenous component, which is our environment, lifestyle, is something that we've adapted to quite easily, because the new time zone has a specific time. So we will wake up at 8, and then we know that it's time for breakfast because it's 8 o'clock local time. If we have training at 10, we know that it's time to exercise because this is in the schedule. But the reality is this internal component or body clock not adjusted to this local time. So although our external component is adjusted, the internal one is saying, wait a minute, but I'm still feeling like the local time when I traveled from home. So we then come and face a few problems. So if we have a little look on the right, so the upper picture is showing the internal and external component, which is pretty well synchronized. So you can see throughout the day, they're more or less synchronized. If we have a look at the one at the bottom, this is when we've traveled. So we can see that this external component in the green is more or less back to where it was before, graph above. But the internal component is struggling to follow suit. So you can see that the external component is pretty much the same as before, and the internal component is really not quite sure where it's at. So what we need to understand is that the different rhythms will adjust to the new time zones at different rates. And again, different individuals will also adjust to the new time zones at different rates. So if we have a little look at time zone transitions in athletes. So we know that elite athletes already are associated with poor sleep and sleeping patterns. We know that there's habitual sleep durations of less than 7 hours. We know that we're associated, or athletes are associated, with this daytime fatigue and sleepiness. And also what we know is that elite athletes have shown a decrease in performance when traveling as little as 5 time zones, whether it be east or whether it be west, for training and competition. And also what's very important to understand is that chronotype, age, and the flexibility of our habits, so this means being able to adapt easily to new times, to new beds, to new environments, to new food, etc., will determine the severity and the severity of the jet lag symptoms that we face. So again, the older we get, the more difficult or the less flexible we are with our habits. So in general, the more jet lag or higher jet lag symptoms that we will face. So what is our aim with travel fatigue? Well, our aim is to completely reduce this stress and disruption as much as possible to our normal routine. So now I'm going to give you some basic strategies when it comes to this travel fatigue and traveling. So before we travel, what can we do? Let's wear loose and comfortable clothes, because there's nothing worse than being on a plane and we're in some tight jeans and we're unable to move and we're comfortable. We have 2 individuals sat next to us. This is just not a nice feeling. So wear loose and comfortable clothes. Again, if you're an athlete, do not carry your luggage at the airport. Always use a trolley, because you're already a little bit stressed, a little bit tired from having to travel, and so there is a likelihood or more likelihood of you to get injured, to make a mistake, to hurt yourself, whatever it may be, to strain yourself. So use a trolley instead of carrying your luggage. Again, we need to make sure that we're well rested and have had sufficient sleep the week before departure. So it's not the day before, it's a week before departure. So we need to prepare, make sure that we're going to bed early, make sure that we have a good routine before our trip, before our departure to wherever we may be traveling. Again, pack earplugs and eye shades. So make sure that we bring our earplugs, eye shades with us. And then last but not least, make sure also that we take books and or music, just so we can relax and enjoy our trip, and time goes a little bit quicker when we're traveling. And then the most important one, something which has happened a few times when I've traveled with athletes, is make sure that you've packed your passport. So this should be one of the first things that you're taking with you, is your passport. But what about during travel? So we've covered what we should do pre-travel, so now let's have a look at during travel. So what can we do? As athletes, we can do some simple foot and leg exercises while seated. Why do we want to do this? Because we just want to keep the blood flowing within our body and to make sure that we don't have stiff muscles or stiff parts of the body when we get off the flight. Again, drinking regular fluid regularly at specific intervals. Water and juice are probably the best choices. We can always ask the air host or air hostess to give us a bottle of water. Just say you're traveling for a competition and they'll be more than happy to do so. And we can drink fluid at regular intervals. And what's good about drinking fluids at regular intervals, there is a likelihood that we will need to go to the toilet, which will cover the third point, and that's walk around the cabin area whenever you can. So get up, get active, just have a little walk around, go to the toilet, whatever it may be that you need to do, but walk around and get yourself a little bit loose. Because while you do this, you can also stretch and loosen your arms. Again, this is a mistake that a lot of people make. Do not consume caffeine on the flight, because this negatively affects our mood and our state when traveling. So stay away from caffeine. Water and juice are the choices that you should. Again, do not cross your legs when seated, again, because the blood flow through your muscles and your body will be reduced. So this will negatively affect you when you land and when you get off the plane. And again, do not take any sleeping pills. The sleeping pills are not the way to proceed when it comes to traveling. We've covered the pre-arrival, we've covered the during travel. So now let's provide some basic coping strategies when it comes to arrival. So what is some of the general advice that we can give upon arrival? So let's try and adapt to the new time zone, if there is any, as quickly as possible. We need to aim to get as much sleep as possible, but during the night. So even if we land at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, let's not go to bed. If unable to sleep or fall back asleep during the night, just stay in bed for 15 to 20 minutes, because more likely than not, you will fall back asleep. And again, if you wake up the next day, do not worry if you feel sleepy or less alert. We can have a coffee in the morning, no problem, to help us feel a little bit more alert. So that's not an issue. So we can nap during the day on the first day, maybe for 30 to 45 minutes, only if we feel very tired or we've had some form of training. Again, don't consume any caffeine 4 hours before bedtime. Try and continue with our usual diet as much as possible. And then, of course, exercise, but nothing too hard prior to competition. And again, this is something which is very important. The first few days, do not disturb. So there is urgent sleeping going on, and which is in progress. So if you're meant to meet at 7 o'clock, make it a window between 7 and 8. So if the individual, the athlete, needs an hour longer for sleep, that's not a problem. Let them sleep, let them wake up at 7:30, 7:45 to come to the breakfast for 8 o'clock. So that's not an issue. The first couple of days, let's keep a window open. So let's not have a schedule which is too rigid, because this will help us with this travel fatigue, but also with this jet lag, which we will discuss later on. Again, we want to avoid food poisoning. So let's not drink any tap water. Always make sure that it's from the bottle and that it's sealed, irrespective of where we're traveling. Let's not have ice in drinks. We don't know where the water for ice has come from. Never eat reheated food. Don't eat food from street stalls from outside. Don't try and enjoy or go for new foods, especially if they're spicy, because this will upset your stomach and then you will have issues later on. And try not to eat seafood, because again, we don't know how it's been stored, and in seafood, the likelihood of bacteria are far higher than if we were to eat meat or vegetarian. What we can do, though, is we can be wary of salads and raw vegetables. Why? Because we don't know with what water that it's been cleaned. So again, the likelihood of becoming sick, having bacteria, is increased. If we choose fruit, choose a fruit that we have to peel, because it basically has a protective cover around it, so you're less likely to have any issues. So we're talking about these bananas, these oranges, these kiwis, these types of fruit. Mango, again, is a good example. Avoid eating outside the official hotel or competition complex. And again, we need to eat food which is very, very warm. So the warmer, the better. So if we see that the food is not hot enough, ask them to reheat it so it's very warm. And if it's too warm, just wait a couple of minutes and have it once it's cooled down. So now that we've covered travel fatigue, let's go on to jet lag, which is a little bit more complex and which will require a little bit more concentration and a little bit more in-depth discussion. So what is our aim with jet lag? Well, we're looking to reduce the amount of time that we take to adapt to the new time zone, and then to normalize our sleep, our appetite, and our performance as fast as possible. So what are some of the basic strategies pre-travel? So we need to make sure that we give ourselves enough time to sleep and to follow the adaptation plan that we've set prior to traveling. We need to build buffers or specific times into our schedule just in case we feel sluggish, which basically means if we do need a nap at some point, let's build a time period where we can nap. But we also need to make sure that we arrive some days in advance of an event, of a competition, so that we do have time to acclimate. Because if we're arriving one day before an 8-hour eastward flight, the likelihood is that we won't perform to the levels that we usually perform at. Again, we need to minimize our travel stress. Like I mentioned earlier on, don't wait until the last minute to find your passport or to pack or to leave for the airport. So let's build in a nice amount of time in case we do miss a train or in case something does happen on our way to the airport, to ensure that we're not stressed when we get there. And as we discussed earlier on, get this quality sleep. So focus on getting quality rest for a few nights before or the week before your trip, so that you are not already sleep deprived on arrival or at the start of your trip. So what are some of the basic strategies that we can use on arrival? So we can exercise, so we can find time for a quick walk or other light physical activity, because exercising outside will help us recalibrate or resynchronize the circadian rhythm, because as I mentioned before, bright light is one of these rhythms which follows this 24 hours and which affects this body clock. So by doing so, we will adapt a little bit quicker to the new times. Limit alcohol, caffeine, and heavy meals. So we need to avoid this excessive caffeine, alcohol, or heavy and calorie-rich meals, high carbohydrate meals. So for the caffeine, no one is saying don't have a caffeine in the morning when you feel a little bit sluggish, or in the afternoon after lunch when you're feeling a little bit sluggish, but try to avoid this excessive use of having 4, 5, 6 coffees in the day because we feel tired. Again, we need to nap with caution. So we need to avoid this temptation of taking extra long naps because we're tired. Because what happens if we have a long nap during the day, we're unable to sleep in the evening, and we're delaying this recalibration, this resynchronization of the body clock to the local time. But if only it was that simple. So if this was only the strategies that we had to use, then it would be very simple and we wouldn't really require to have this lecture or this discussion today. It's not as simple as 1 + 1 = 2, because it's a little bit more complex when we start looking at it in more detail. So if we have a look at the interventions which have been used to alleviate jet lag, many different interventions have been used. And the severity of the symptoms and the adjustment of the athlete or the individual which is traveling is highly dependent not only on the direction of travel, we mentioned before, but also these inter-individual variations of age, chronotype, whatever it may be. And again, the timing of the circadian rhythm can be reset, but the question is how. So let's have a look at how this can be reset. But before we do this, let's look a little bit at the type of interventions which have been used in the literature. So pharmacological interventions have been used, which range from melatonin, which is a hormone which is released by the pineal gland at night and is associated with the control of the sleep and wake cycle. Sedatives, so these are hypnotic drugs which are prescribed as sleeping aids and which promote this calmness, this being relaxed. Stimulants, which is a class of drugs that speed up the messages between the brain and the body, which promote this alertness, this wakefulness, this energy. And then we also have this non-pharmacological interventions, such as exercise. So we know that exercise can help to shift the body clock forward or backward, which can potentially help to counter the effects of jet lag. Sleep. So we know that sleep has important biological functions related to physiological processes, related to learning, memory, cognition, and that sleep preservation is potentially an important strategy of jet lag management. Then nutrition, so planning our food and fluid intake that is appropriate to the travel itinerary. will help reduce problems and will help us adapt to the new environment quicker. And then this slide, this bright light exposure, which is the most powerful way to cause a phase shift or an advance or a delay in the circadian rhythm. But if we have a look at what has been done with athletes, because we're interested now in athletes and adaptation. So the reality is very little research has actually been done, and there is very little research information, which is currently available. However, there is some research available on this non-pharmacological interventions, which are related to sleep, exercise, and light. And there's very, very little or scarce research available on this pharmacological interventions for melatonin and sedatives. And there is no research available for nutrition or stimulant use in athletes, I need to specify, so in athletes, to alleviate jet lag. So what has been found if we have a look at these interventions and athletes? So let's focus first on exercise. So only 4 studies or athlete-specific studies have assessed whether exercise can help as an intervention for jet lag. All of the studies suggested that exercise may actually help with the resynchronization of the circadian system following long-haul travel. But the timing and the intensity of the exercise session that's being provided is actually very important. So from this, we can really conclude that the current evidence when it comes to athlete-specific studies supports exercise for reducing jet lag symptoms. So what has been found when it comes to sleep? So 3 athlete-specific studies have assessed sleep as an intervention for jet lag. So napping had some positive influence on reducing jet lag, but the combined intervention of using breathing and sleep training didn't really have a positive outcome. So the reality is the conclusions from these are that this is for exercise, but sleep can help alleviate some feelings of jet lag, but it's not really shown to be one of the main aids. So on to light. So again, only 3 athlete-specific studies have been assessed or have assessed the effect of light as an intervention for jet lag. So the effect of light as a sole intervention, so by itself, did not fully report benefits on reducing jet lag symptoms. So using light as part of a multifactorial intervention, so along with exercise and melatonin, actually displayed positive influences. So again, athlete-specific studies with light as an intervention have shown to reduce jet lag, but there are some contrasting results. But this will become a little bit more clear shortly as to why this may be. So if we now have a look at melatonin. So again, only 2 studies have actually looked at melatonin as an intervention. One study claimed that melatonin administration reduced the time for resynchronization of the circadian system, but the other one had slightly mixed results. And the other study, which was part of a multifactorial intervention, so looking at different interventions along with melatonin, I believe, which were light and exercise, also showed positive influences on jet lag alleviation. So the conclusion is exogenous, so melatonin taken externally may be important to recover from jet lag. If we have a look at sedatives, so only 1 study has looked at sedatives, and this was looking at temazepam as a possible intervention. And we need to also understand that side effects are not uncommon when it comes to using sedatives. So again, these medications do help with our sleep duration and quality, but whether or not they lessen daytime symptoms of jet lag is very unlikely. So if we have a little look at the nutrition and stimulants, again, we know that there were no athlete-specific studies which assess the effect of it, but in healthy populations, stimulants have shown encouraging results when it comes to jet lag alleviation, and they do improve the synchronization of circadian rhythms. And regarding nutrition and meals, appropriate timing and compositions of meals actually are a valuable treatment strategy to reduce some of the jet lag symptoms that we may come across. So if we were now to create a travel strategy, so let's focus on an individual traveling from London to Tokyo. So what do we know? We know that it's a 12-hour flight, we know that there's 8 hours difference, and we know that we're traveling eastward. So if we have a little look at this time zone shift east to west. So here we have a look at the one which is west and the one with the green box which is east. So what we can see is if we're traveling west and we have a look at the black cone, we're trying to shift our body clock 8 hours towards the left. If we're traveling east, we're trying to shift our body clock 8 hours towards the right. So if it was 8 o'clock, let's have a look at this second figure. If it was 8 o'clock in London, it would be 4 o'clock in Tokyo. So basically what this means is that when we're going west, we're trying to delay. When we're going east, we're trying to advance. So we also know, and we discussed this earlier on, traveling several time zones to the east causes worse jet lag than flying the same number of time zones to the west. So if we fly 8 hours east from London to Tokyo, we know that our circadian system or our internal body clock is still entrained the timings and the rhythms of our internal rhythm, which is London. So like I said before, when we're actually 4 o'clock in Tokyo, the reality is we're 8 o'clock in the evening in London. So it might be we arrive in Tokyo 4 o'clock in the morning, we're still wide awake and we're wondering, why am I still awake? While the reality is we're still awake because our internal body clock is saying that it's 8 o'clock. And this is exactly the same when it comes to performance. So when we're expecting to have our best performance in this afternoon, the reality is our body clock is still thinking that we're in the morning, so our performance is actually reduced when it should be high. But what can we do? So if we have a look at 8 hours travel to the east. So we're talking and discussing about light exposure. So this can be done through machines, such as the one on the picture, or this can also be done through natural light if we go outside. So again, for everything we have these bad times and we have good times when it comes to exposure for light. So if we're traveling 8 hours east and we have a look at the green box on the left, bad times for exposure to light are 5 o'clock till 11 o'clock in the morning. The good times to expose to light are 1 to 7 o'clock in the evening. Why 1 to 7 o'clock? Because we need to understand that when it's 1 to 7 o'clock in the evening local time, this is actually our morning time in the UK. So we're trying to move this body clock back to the local time where we're at now. So again, and if we have a look at using light on individuals, we can see the individuals which used light as a strategy, nearly all of them recovered from jet lag compared to the individuals who didn't recover, which were very, very small. So again, this is dependent on the individual. So this strategy does work, but it doesn't mean that it will work with everyone. Which is why we always look at other aspects as well and other strategies that we can combine. So we know also that this melatonin through light exposure or avoidance and physical exercise exposure or avoidance at the right times will also help us promote synchronization of the body clock at faster rates. So we found, and we know that ingesting a 3 milligram dose of melatonin at the correct time points will not interfere with the main sleep period. So if we were to combine this melatonin, exercise and light, we could potentially synchronize our body clock at faster rates than if we did nothing at all. But the reality is, what does this look like if we were to build this into a strategy when traveling? So if we have a look at an individual who's traveling 8 hours east, what would this actually look like? So let's say we arrive at 1 o'clock and we sleep from 11 till 7. Our light exposure are these yellow boxes when we're providing light every single day. So because our body clock is changing, we're just moving forward this light exposure until 7 in the morning, because 7 in the morning would then be the local time. So when we get up, when we would first see light. So this is why we go from this afternoon and we're shifting this body clock or this internal component towards the left to come and fit with the time that it's currently or that it's locally. So the M's exactly the same, which are the melatonin, so 3 milligram dose of exogenous melatonin. So we're talking about a tablet, not light, because we can also get melatonin through light. So again, we're starting early in the morning, and now we're delaying this melatonin ingestion again towards the left, so we can shift our body clock. And then what will happen, as you can see on this day 7, day 8, we will be fully synchronized to the new time zone. So we will have completely shifted our synchronization to the new time zone. Because what you need to understand is this triangle is the lowest point of body temperature in the human body. So we know that this occurs early morning. So again, we're shifting this all the way to the left, to the early morning. But we also need to remember now other things that we can do to help. So we've built this strategy, we're following this strategy, but this is not the only thing that we should be doing when it comes to trying to alleviate jet lag. So we also need to look at our hydration and our nutrition. So electrolyte tablets, high protein and high fiber snacks, very important when we're traveling. Bring them with us because it will help with our hydration and nutrition status, and will also mean that we're less likely to have this gastrointestinal issues or this stomach aches, and will help us adapt and recover quicker on arrival. Again, for our athletes, let's use compression socks in flight. Let's make sure that we provide them with foam rolling or mobility exercises both before we travel and on arrival. So there's always space in an airport to perform some exercise, to do these exercises pre and post travel. And again, especially very important now when we're traveling, make sure that we bring antibacterial wipes and hand sanitizer. If we've forgotten it, there's more than enough shops in the airport which are selling these items. So let's make sure that we're using these on our hands on a regular basis, but that we're also wiping down these airport seats or these bus seats or these train seats, whatever that we may be using when traveling, to ensure that everything is clean. So some further basic recommendations, but now regarding to sleep when we get to our destination. And this was something that I covered in this previous lecture or discussion which I had for you guys. So again, we need to fall asleep within 30 minutes of going to bed. If we're awake when we get to our destination, let's not start using our electronic devices and going on our phones. Again, we might be awake, we might fancy a coffee because it's currently 2 o'clock for our internal body clock because we've come from London, but the reality is it's 10 o'clock when we arrived in Tokyo, and we fancy a coffee because we're used to it, but don't have caffeine because it's close to your new bedtime. Again, do not change your sleeping patterns. So go to bed and wake up at similar times every single day, but make sure that it's with the local and the new adapted time. Again, there's good sleeping environment, there's good routine. So again, this is why it's important to create this small window when it comes to having meetings, having breakfast. So let's meet between 7 and 8 o'clock for breakfast. Let's meet between 12:30 and 1:30 for lunch. So keeping these routines, keeping this environment for sleep, a good and a healthy environment. But how do we create a good sleep environment? So let's go through 4 basic steps. So let's take a nice warm bath or shower approximately an hour before we go to bed, because it will help us relax, it will just make sure that we're more comfortable. Then step 2, make sure that our bedroom is like a cave. So it needs to be dark, it needs to be cool, preferably with air conditioning around 18 to 19 degrees, because this is the best temperature for us to get high quality and good sleep. And also it needs to be extremely quiet. So this is why I mentioned earlier on, bring those earplugs, bring the face masks. Again, turn off our phone, turn off our electronic devices, find the comfortable position and fall asleep. One thing that will help with finding a comfortable position and falling asleep is this bringing your own pillow to increase our comfort. So if we know that we like specific pillows, bring your own pillow, increase the comfort, increase your environment of sleep. This will help with your recovery, but this will also help with your adaptation when it comes to jet lag over the following days, and will also, most importantly, help with your performance and your competition. So as coaches and as practitioners, we now need to be able to assist our athletes through travel fatigue and through jet lag symptoms. So we need to understand the basics. If we're crossing less than 3 time zones, then we know that it's highly unlikely to be a major concern for most individuals. So we need to go through the basic preparation of pre-travel, during travel, post-travel, which was discussed earlier on. If we know that the stay is very short, maybe it's not worth it to adjust our body clock. So if we're only staying for 3 days, maybe we should adapt to the local time that we're traveling at by adapting the time at home. So if we know that we're traveling a 5-hour time difference, but only staying for 3 days, maybe we can already start shifting the time at home to fit the one where we're traveling to. And then again, if the journey is across more than these 3 time zones and the stay is more than 3 days, then we need to make sure that we keep this travel fatigue, this jet lag to a minimum, and we promote the adjustment of the body clock by using light, the promotion of sleep or this body clock adjustment by using melatonin, and also ensuring that we have some exercise, and in the morning, early afternoon if needs be, some caffeine to maintain this daytime alertness. Training intensities and timings. And I've been an individual who has had this issue before with a few coaches, where an individual has arrived after a long flight from a different time zone. First day, training should be less demanding than usual. What does the coach do? Goes for a nice high intensity session. This will wear off your travel fatigue. This will wear off your jet lag. When the reality is he should have gone for a very low intensive training, What happens? The athlete is sick and is out for the next 4 days. Again, increase the warm-up, do more flexibility, do more mobility. Remember, we were sat in an airplane, we were traveling for 14, 15, 16, however many hours that it may be. So we're not up to peak physical condition. So let's ease our way into it. Again, reduce the difficulty level to avoid injuries. We don't want to be going to an important competition. We've not fully adapted. We've gone for a hard first training session because the competition is in 7 days' time, and all of a sudden our athlete is feeling his shoulder, is feeling his elbow, whatever it may be, because the session was too intensive. What else can we do? So we can actually use a questionnaire to assess symptoms of jet lag of our athletes. Prime example is a Liverpool Jet Lag Questionnaire. If you have a look on the right, this is what the questionnaire covers. So it covers different aspects related to jet lag. So a question about jet lag, a question about sleep, a question about your fatigue, a question about food, meals, nutrition, a question about, or a few questions about mental performance, and then some questions about bowel activity. And what we will get from this is a specific score. And if we have a look at the graph on the left, what we would expect is for this to go down close to 0 by the time that it's day 8. But we need to understand that it's not going to be 0 when we're traveling to a different country, because there's still issues with this food, with different society, with different beds, with different whatever it may be. You still have some form of adaptation that you're not fully adapted to because you're not in your own home, you're not in your own comfort. So just to conclude, so we need to minimize the stress associated with travel through appropriate planning. We need to seek help from expert individuals when it comes to scheduling training times and intensities, because they might be able to help and to say your training sessions are too extreme when it comes to an individual traveling 8 hours east, 8 hours west. So really diminish those training times and intensities. Again, seek expertise help if needed to create an appropriate travel plan. So do not go and provide 10 milligrams of melatonin to your athlete without really knowing the understanding or implications, or say to the athlete to take sleeping pills, because the reality is the long-term negative effects of sleeping pills are quite high. So this is not the role of the coach or of some practitioners to provide a travel plan when they don't fully understand the negative implications that it may have. So again, create a good sleep routine and environment to alleviate jet lag. So this can be through creating these strategies for your athlete, so making sure that you provide a little bit longer for them to adapt or for them to go to breakfast. And then for the athletes, make sure that we always inform coaches of any issues. And coaches, make sure that we support the athletes with those issues. That's it. Thank you very much for listening and for your time.
Yes, Samuel, thank you very much for your comprehensive lecture. And to all the attendees out there, as usual, the PowerPoint slide will be shared on our ITTFeducation.com page. And also a big thanks for this, Samuel. And now we do have some ITTF HPD questions for you before going over to the prior and in-webinar questions. And I would like to start with a question, and this one is, Samuel, if there is a formula related to the acclimatation, for example, if you're traveling to a place 3 hours time difference to your zone, you know, should you arrive 2 days prior the competition, or is there any formula regarding this question?
I mean, obviously the way I would try to fit it in is always to have a couple of days before your competition, one, to adapt to the new environment, because again, when you're sleeping in a hotel, when you're in a new environment, different training hall, whatever it may be, different stresses that you wouldn't have at home. It's always better to have a couple of days beforehand. You get used to your surroundings, you have time to adapt, you have time to set up your bedroom the way you like it, because this is very important as well, so to make sure that the environment that you're staying in is comfortable in the way that you like it. So I would always recommend to come 2-3 days in advance. One, because the first day, really you need to go for minimal intensities, irrespective of whether it's a travel fatigue destination or a jet lag destination, because the reality is the first day, if we keep it very low, very basic in intensity, this means that the second day we can increase a little bit, and again the third day we're good to go and we're fully adapted to the new surroundings and the new environment.
Thank you very much, and I pass the word to Massimo for the next one.
Yeah, Samuel, great presentation. So many really important information and facts. Very helpful, I have to say, as usual. I mean, this is not new from your side, and we all enjoy your presentation. Super informative, I would say. I was attracted by one of the first slide you showed regarding the time spent on the long haul flights, regarding the noise. And, you know, I mean, nowadays we are all carrying our personal devices with noise cancelling, or maybe from the entertainment, from the flights, entertainment programs. Is this kind of noise, additional noise, I don't know, I would say, and the videos, let's say, bombing the eyes with a lot of entertainment movies and so on, can help or maybe worsen the physical condition at your arrival?
Good question. So, I mean, the recommendation that I would give to anyone traveling is the minute you get to the airport or the minute you leave your house, you are now on the local time of where you're traveling. So obviously, if you're on an airplane and it's meant to be 3 o'clock in the morning in Japan, we will say that we're traveling to Japan, and you're looking or watching a film which is sending light signals into your brain, which is basically saying, stay awake, stay awake, stay awake. Again, you're already delaying this adaptation. So the best thing to do is, if it's 3 o'clock in Japan and you're traveling, is best is just listen to music or read a book. So go for something which is not promoting this light or this waking up effect, because again, the longer we take to adapt when we get there, the longer our performance is negatively affected. So ultimately, it doesn't directly affect performance, but your performance will be affected as a result of your behavior when traveling as well. So obviously, I understand that you won't be able to sleep because your body clock is saying, but it's 8 o'clock in the UK or France or wherever it may be that you're traveling from. But at least to be more relaxed, noise cancellation earphones or earplugs, whatever that it may be, read a book, and try to already adapt to this local time by being in a more relaxed state, in a more relaxed mood, rather than watching films and staying awake.
Cool. So it's all about to adjust immediately with the local time that you're going to have there, and not to create more problems than you already have while traveling. Excellent, as usual. You know, we are table tennis players, so we don't touch the ball twice. We have to touch the ball only once. So I return the ball to Dominic for his next question.
Thank you very much, Massimo. Samuel, are there any serious researches on how much exertion is put on the body when you are having stops during your trip and when you are changing the planes? How much more, I mean, exertion is put on the body, you know?
I mean, obviously, the longer we're traveling, the more stress is associated and the more travel fatigue. If we're traveling with a stopover, the likelihood is that we're losing this additional day, because the reality is if we had a direct flight, let's say from Sao Paulo to Japan, it would be 13, 14 hours, but all of a sudden it's 25, 26. So we're losing this additional day of reduced sleep or very bad sleep. So obviously the exertion on the body is increased, and we know, as we discussed in the last talk, that sleep deprivation does negatively affect our mood state, our performance, and so forth. So if we're sleep deprived for a day, again, it's going to take longer to adapt. So it has a negative effect from different sides.
Okay, thank you very much. So for all the associations out there, if possible, just direct flights. This was your advice. Thank you. Okay, good. Pass over to you, Max, again.
Yeah, well, it happens that players, coaches, staff traveling on the other side of the world, and maybe the competition is very short. I mean, there are some competition, a couple of days, and then maybe they don't have time to adjust. You know, as you were saying with that graphs that you showed before. Well, what kind of advice you could give in this case where the time is too short to adapt, to adjust?
So I would give two recommendations. Recommendation one would be, can we integrate a training camp within the competition? If it's a competition which is important, which is taking place at a specific time point of the year, are we able to build a training camp in advance of the competition? So is there enough time? Do we have the finances to do this? And then go on to the competition, because then it gives us time, obviously, to acclimate to the new time zone, but also to have a preparation phase prior to our competition phase. So this would be the ideal scenario. Okay. Of course, we know finances don't always allow, time points during the year don't always allow, because it might be that we have a competition, a local competition or a competition close by, and we cannot do a camp. So if we're unable to do this, let's already adapt to the time zone at home. So this is the only way that we can do it. Obviously, this is not the ideal strategy, but this is the best strategy that we can use, where now we try and live as closely as possible to the time zone that we're going to try and alleviate all these symptoms that we will have on arrival, because our body clock will be used to the time that we're traveling to. So the only real thing that's then a problem is travel fatigue rather than this jet lag symptoms that might be present.
Oh, cool. So maybe in the days before the traveling, maybe they practice in the night and they sleep in the morning. Yes.
I mean, the reality is if we want to compete at a high level and we want to gain the full benefits, we need to be ready to adapt and be ready to change.
Extreme remedies, let's say. Okay, thank you as usual. Dominic, to you.
Thanks, Max. And Samuel, it's time now for a prior webinar question from Roshan Oya. And the question is, how can I improve the quality of my sleep and develop habit of waking up early? I have tried a lot to be an early bird, but every time it's a failure.
Yeah, so obviously we need to understand that we have different chronotypes. So some people are a little bit more inclined to being early, some are a little bit more inclined to being late, and the majority, 95% of people really fit in this intermediate category. I mean, I would not pressurize myself to try and change or shift too much and become an early bird. What I would try and do is to change my pattern slowly but surely by trying to go to bed a little bit earlier, waking up at the time that you want to wake up, and then continuing with this cycle on a regular basis. Because obviously the more that we, let's say, practice and that we abide by following this routine, the more likely it is that we will shift slightly towards becoming more of an early bird. So it's all about routine, it's all about environment, it's all about continuing and sticking to the plan that you've set. A little bit like with nutrition. If we're looking to lose weight, we're not going to lose weight within 2 weeks. It's a short, medium and long-term plan that we need to follow to ensure that we get results.
Thank you very much, Samuel, for your answer. And I pass the word back to Massimo for an in-webinar question.
Yeah, it's all about to educate and be disciplined in what you do if you want to get results, right? Samuel. I have one question, very interesting, from the Q&A from Juan Pablo Parra, and we have discussed about traveling from west to east, vice versa, and so on. So his question is, what strategies would you recommend when traveling to a different, higher altitude place? Like, Bogota or Mexico City, so we don't go right, left, but we go up.
Well, when we're traveling up, again, this is more related to altitude. Again, we know that at altitude, there's a reduced level of oxygen available to our working body. We have this environmental effect now, which is affecting our adaptation. So again, there's different adaptation strategies that we can utilize both prior to traveling and on arrival, which are acclimation and acclimatization strategies, is what we call them, to be more specific, which are out there that we can utilize and that we can adopt before traveling to places which are higher in environment. So again, there's strategies that can be utilized, and there's quite a lot of research available now in the literature when it comes to acclimatization and acclimation to levels of altitude.
Cool. Okay, I hope Juan Pablo, Samuel answered to your questions, and time is as usual with Samuel. It's a pleasure to go over the time, but I think we have one more, right, Dominic, before leaving our guest to his research.
Yeah, you are right. The last question for you for today, Samuel, it's from Katia Mifsud, and she would like to know, is it helpful to top up on hydration before the trip? Does it have a good effect on reducing the fatigue?
So obviously, I mean, we know hydration is a highly important aspect when it comes to regulation of a lot of different aspects related to the body. So I mean, topping up is not so important, but creating, again, a regular pattern strategy that we utilize throughout our trip, like I mentioned, I think in my talk on one of the slides, by using potentially some electrolytes when we're flying, because we know that we have less availability of fluids, is more beneficial, I would say, than topping up in advance. So the use of electrolytes when we're flying is probably a better strategy to adopt than topping up beforehand. Because again, if we're topping up beforehand, we're drinking a lot of water. And when we drink a lot of water, what happens is we get bloated. When we get bloated, we need to go to the toilet more regularly. So it's not also a comfortable position to be in if you need to go to the toilet 4 or 5 times pre-flight, during flight, post-flight, etc. So having this strategy where we're drinking on more regular bases will help not only with our flight and our in-flight, what can I say, feeling, but of course it's going to aid long-term our performance, our sleep, etc. So of course, to adopt a good strategy of hydration is very important. But I wouldn't top up beforehand. I would use electrolytes and have more regular drinking intervals rather than top up.
Thank you for your answer, Samu. And dear Samu, we, the entire ITTF HPD team, we thank you a lot for taking the time to be here today and for your lecture and for sharing your knowledge and expertise regarding the travel strategies for the table tennis players. So thank you very much for this, Samu.
Thank you for having me.
And thanks a lot also to our audience for attending, and we hope our 47 ITTF HPD Table Tennis at Your Fingertips webinar was interesting and educational for you. And I'm looking forward to our future webinars, for which further information will follow soon. So stay tuned, and that's all from my side for today. Stay safe and healthy, and I pass the word to Italy, to my dear colleague Massimo, and I kindly ask him for his closing words.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, my closing words are very simple. Again, thank you, Samuel. Congratulations. Another great contents and lecture from your side. Your expertise is very always welcome, and we will not be tired to thank you, and thank you. So we hope to see again soon, as Dominic said about the next webinar, and of course also to meet you guys out there in person as soon as possible. Thank you very much, and stay safe, stay healthy, and ciao.